3 broken forks, 1 cracked window, and a past no one dares to mention. That's all Mira Callahan had left. Her fingers quivered slightly as she counted the last of the faded bills inside her frayed wallet. $23.47. It was all she had after scraping together just enough to cover the overdue electric bill that morning. Outside their narrow third-floor apartment in a rundown part of Bristol, Pennsylvania, the snow danced like ghosts under the flicker of dying streetlights. Christmas Eve shimmered dimly through frostbitten glass, mocking her with its warmth. "Are we still going, Mama?" came the tiny voice of Elly, her 7-year-old daughter, poking her head around the chipped doorframe with cautious hope glimmering in her eyes. Behind her stood 4-year-old Benji, holding tight to the threadbare penguin plush his dad gave him the night before his final deployment. Mira, brushing her tangled hair behind her ear, managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At 29, she carried herself like someone far older, worn but upright, like a tree in permanent winter. "We're going," she said gently, tugging Benji's zipper up and adjusting Elly's oversized knit hat. "It's Christmas Eve. We promised." 3 years had dragged by since 2 officers in solemn black coats had knocked on her door, one a chaplain, the other a casualty liaison with news sharp enough to slice through flesh. Staff Sergeant Connor Callahan, killed in a convoy rollover, left behind a widow and 2 babies too young to understand the finality of folded flags and final salutes. The life insurance money barely covered the funeral and some hospital bills. The rest, swallowed up by reality, one gray day at a time. Now Mira worked graveyard shifts at Stan's Gas and Go, wiping down sticky counters and restocking shelves while her kids slept under the thin but loyal watch of Mrs. Devers, the elderly woman from 3B. Every cent was mapped, every purchase questioned, and indulgence, a forgotten word. But tonight had to mean something, a fragment of joy. A memory carved deep enough to last until spring, even if just one meal at a half-decent restaurant. She'd picked the Blue Lantern Diner on Oak Street. Small, warm, and known for its $5.99 kids combo, the only math that added up. $20 for all 3 of them, with a slim tip tucked into her pocket. The bell above the door jingled softly as they entered. Elly's mouth fell open at the garlands strung like magic, while Benji made a beeline for the display case, eyes wide at the peppermint pie. Mira guided them to a quiet booth by the fogged-up window, trying not to draw attention. A waitress in a frizzy ponytail dropped off menus and water with a distracted smile before drifting off toward the back. Across the room, 2 young men sipped coffee, their civilian clothes doing a poor job of hiding the stiffness in their posture, military probably. The kind that noticed everything. Mira ordered the cheapest adult dish, grilled cheese and soup, and kids' meals for the little ones. But as the waitress left, a tall, balding man in a stained apron pushed through the kitchen doors. Mr. Darren Kepler, the owner. His sharp eyes scanned the diner, pausing when they landed on Mira's table, his jaw set. He stalked over, scowl deepening with each step. "You planning on making a mess with those kids?" He barked loud enough for forks to pause midair around the room. Mira swallowed hard. "No, sir. They're well behaved." His gaze dragged over her worn-out coat, the children's patched clothing. "You sure you can pay? We're not running a soup kitchen here." The clatter of cutlery stopped. The other patrons turned stiff, their attention suddenly buried in scrambled eggs and coffee mugs. Mira's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, I have enough. I wouldn't be here otherwise." Mr. Kepler didn't back down. His voice climbed. "This is a respectable place, not a refuge for broke single moms and their half-starved kids." Benji's lip quivered. Elly stared hard at the snowflake print tablecloth. Mira stood slowly, her back straight, her dignity a fortress. "We'll go," she said, voice tight. "We won't trouble you again." One of the young men in the back began to rise, but the other grabbed his arm firmly. "Don't, Keegan. Not tonight." Mira didn't look back. She gathered her children, guided them through the door, and into the flurry of snow already building on the sidewalk. No one spoke up. Not one voice challenged the cruelty. In this world, the kind often walk alone, and they do it with their heads high, even when the world tells them to bow. But sometimes, the quiet strength of a soul that refuses to break plants something deep in those who watch. Back home, the apartment door shut behind them with a hollow thud. The heater coughed but offered little warmth. Mira pulled her children close. The cold that gripped her wasn't from the snow outside. It came from a deeper place. It wasn't the cold air that haunted Mira Callahan, it was the memory of her children's faces as they were led out of the diner. Confusion clouded with shame flickered in their young eyes like a candle choking on its last breath. "I'm not even that hungry," Elly said, trying to sound brave, though her tiny voice cracked at the seams. Benji looked up, brow furrowed in that heartbreaking way children wear worry. "Did we do something bad, Mama?" Mira bent down slowly, meeting his eyes with all the strength she could muster. Her hands rested gently on his shoulders. "No, baby, you didn't. Some people just forget how to be kind." She stood and turned toward the kitchen area, opening a flimsy box that had come from the church donation table last week. Inside, slightly squished but still glittering with effort, were frosted Christmas cookies, stale but lovingly shaped into trees and stars. She arranged them on a plate as though she were handling porcelain, careful and ceremonious. "Behold," she announced, with a strained cheerfulness. "Christmas cookies for dinner. Way better than anything a restaurant could dream up, right?" The kids nodded, catching the game, pretending this was a grand holiday twist and not what it truly was, necessity in a Santa hat. As they munched with giggles too light to be entirely fake, Mira's eyes drifted to the worn box tucked in the corner of the room. It was their time capsule, one full of meaning. Mementos, photos, small things that once belonged to Connor. On top, a photo. Her husband in dress blues. Smile stretching into the corners of his eyes, the same way Benji's did when he laughed. Beneath the frame, written in Connor's bold, looping handwriting, "For those we leave behind." Morning arrived with a twist no one expected. Someone at the Blue Lantern Diner had caught the confrontation on camera. Mr. Kepler's tirade had made it to local social feeds overnight, and the wildfire was already burning. Comments exploded under the video. "Dragging kids out to fish for sympathy? Gross," one post sneered. "Restaurants aren't babysitters," another added. "But not everyone joined the mob." "I've been where she is. I just didn't have two little mouths to feed," wrote another. "Those kids were better behaved than my niece, and she eats there every week." Somewhere deeper online, in a private group of Marine Corps veterans, the video surfaced and sparked a different kind of ripple. A user named Recon Ghost 79 wrote, "Callahan, wasn't that the name of a guy from the Najaf convoy back in '09? The comment ignited a thread of connections. Service logs were pulled. Names aligned. Pieces fell into place. By noon, Major Jonathan P. Reeves, stationed at Fort Allegiant, just across the state line, received a text with the video and a name he hadn't seen in over a decade. "Sir, isn't that Sergeant Callahan's widow? The same guy who dragged Corporal Henson and Meyer out of that burning Humvee in the South Compound?" Back in Bristol, unaware of the brewing digital storm, Mr. Kepler issued a dry response to the local paper. "We reserve the right to refuse service," he said. "This is a family establishment. We have standards." His statement did little to slow the backlash, but Mira didn't know about any of it. She had no social media, no alerts, no clue. When a young reporter called to ask for a statement, she politely declined. No drama, no fight. Instead, she bundled the kids up and took them to the community church service that evening. Afterward, while others collected paper plates of warm food, Mira rolled up her sleeves and started scrubbing dishes in the kitchen. Her kids, meanwhile, played in the corner with other little ones whose families had also come for the free holiday meal. "She's helping a lot back there," the kitchen coordinator whispered to Elly and Benji. "You must be proud of your mom." Elly nodded slowly. "She says, if you've ever been really hungry, you should help feed someone else if you can. Some people don't need to be seen, they just need to be understood. If you believe gratitude never expires, if you've ever stood in the dark and waited for someone to light a match, type respect in the comments." The day after Christmas, Mira sat at the same chip table, staring at the bold red letters on the newest utility notice. Final warning before disconnection. A winter surcharge had tipped the tightrope budget into freefall. She folded the paper carefully and slid it into her coat pocket just as the kids padded out from their room. Is it still cold out today? Benji asked, pulling his blanket tighter like a shield. Just a little, Mira said, though she had dropped the thermostat to 62 degrees days ago. We'll pile into the blankets later and read stories. It'll be extra cozy. Elly studied her mother, then asked quietly, Do you think Dad knows what happened at the restaurant? Do you think Daddy can see us from heaven? Elly asked, her voice a whisper floating through the silence. Mira's throat tightened, words catching behind a wall of emotion. I think he sees the important things, she said gently, barely managing the sentence. Across town, the Blue Lantern Diner bustled with its usual post-holiday lunch crowd. Mr. Darren Kepler paced between tables, offering his practiced half-smile to familiar faces, while directing his staff with the same impatient edge. The online video, the one showing him confronting Mira, had drawn a few sharp comments, but most of his regulars acted unbothered. That is, until a dark green military SUV pulled up to the curb outside. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. Two Marines stepped inside, not in casual fatigues or off-duty jackets like the locals were used to, but in full-dress uniforms, starched and formal, their movements sharp and purposeful. They didn't glance at the menu or nod toward the counter. They stood, scanning the room with practiced precision. One gave a subtle nod. The other stepped back outside. Moments later, a third figure entered, taller, older, with a presence that stole the air from the room. Major Jonathan P. Reeves. His rank insignia gleamed as he strode across the tile floor, flanked by the other two. From the kitchen, Mr. Kepler emerged, wiping his hands on a stained apron. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice stiffer than usual. "Mr. Kepler," the major said, though it wasn't phrased as a question. "We need a word." They took a booth near the window. The major pulled a photograph from an envelope and set it carefully on the table. "Do you recognize this Marine?" he asked. Kepler leaned over, eyes narrowing at the smiling soldier in combat gear, arms slung over a fellow Marine, dust and heat in the background. "Should I? Sergeant Connor Callahan. Killed in action 3 years ago. Left behind a wife and 2 children." The words hung in the air like a blade. Reeves kept his tone level, professional. "The same family you refused service to on Christmas Eve." Color drained from Kepler's face. Two didn't know who they were. Not exactly. "You didn't know," the major said slowly, "that Sergeant Callahan saved 5 Marines in the Najaf during an ambush? That he was awarded the Bronze Star posthumously? That his widow has been working 2 jobs to feed their children ever since?" He leaned forward, voice lowering. "We Marines have known hunger too, Mr. Kepler, but we've never turned our backs on someone else who's hungry, especially not the family of a man who gave everything for this country." By mid-afternoon, a fresh sign appeared in the Blue Lantern Diner's window. Authorized by the local Veterans Association, it read, "Refused service to the children of a fallen hero." The fallout was immediate. Customers vanished. The regulars found other spots for pie and coffee. Christmas visitors turned away. By dusk, Kepler stood behind an empty counter, the sound of silence louder than any argument. Back in Mira's apartment, she found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside, a handwritten letter on Marine Corps letterhead. "Mrs. Callahan, we once owed your husband our lives. Now we know how to repay that debt. Semper Fidelis isn't just a motto, it's a promise." His brothers in arms. Tears welled as she unfolded the rest. A box sat beside it inside. Grocery gift cards, warm winter coats in Elly and Benji's sizes, and a savings bond for each child's future education. That evening, Benji tried on his new winter jacket, navy blue with red racing stripes, exactly what he'd pointed to in a catalog months ago. He looked up, serious-eyed. "Mama, can I be a Marine one day? Like Daddy?" Mira knelt, brushing his collar flat as her tears threatened to fall. "Only if you promise to protect others," she whispered, "like these Marines protected us." Elly joined them, slipping her arms around her mother's neck. "We don't need that restaurant anyway," she said quietly. "We have each other. When justice doesn't come from laws or courtrooms, sometimes it finds its way through the hearts of those who've known what it means to lose everything and still choose to stand tall. If you believe in real justice, the kind built on honor and memory, type yes." Spring arrived in Bristol. Snow melted. Bitter memories thawed. Mira's life began to shift in ways she'd never imagined possible. That snowy Christmas Eve hadn't just triggered one moment of kindness, it had started a movement. The Marines' intervention hadn't stopped with a letter and a care package. 2 weeks later, Mira received a call from Fort Allegiance Family Services Office. The voice on the other end of the call offered Mira a position that made her hand tremble around the phone. A part-time role as a kitchen assistant supervisor at Fort Allegiance Mess Hall for incoming recruits. The hours? Perfect, syncing effortlessly with Elly and Benji's school schedule. The pay? More than double what she made behind the counter at Stan's Gas and Go. Even transportation was handled. The base sent a shuttle. "We're looking for someone who knows what these young Marines need," the coordinator had explained. "Someone who understands service, even if she never wore the uniform herself." Mira still lived in the same weather department, but it no longer whispered scarcity in every corner. Now it felt like a space between battles, not a defeat. Weekends were filled with community invitations and base events. Elly had joined a book club run by officers' spouses, often returning home, bubbling over about new stories. Benji, meanwhile, had somehow acquired 6 unofficial uncles who taught him everything from bike repairs to the proper way to salute. On her wall hung 2 photos, one of Connor still young, still alive, beaming in his dress blues, eyes crinkled with that unmistakable smile. Beside it, a new photo, Mira standing with Elly and Benji among a line of solemn Marines, every one of them saluting Connor's portrait. The frame beneath it bore an engraved message: "You didn't just lose him. You inherited all of us." Eventually, the Blue Lantern Diner reopened under new ownership. The new manager? A retired Marine gunnery sergeant who'd served in Connor's unit. His first act: establish a heroes table permanently reserved for families of fallen service members. His second? Offer Mira a weekend management position, turning the site of her humiliation into a place of respect and quiet authority. As for Kepler, he sold the diner after 2 months of relentless boycotts and closed doors. He relocated to a nearby town where fewer people knew what had happened on that bitter Christmas Eve. But before leaving, he left behind an unsigned card and a generous gift certificate on Mira's doorstep, an apology, cowardly but sincere. Mira, without hesitation, donated it to Fort Allegiance Family Emergency Fund. One night, as she oversaw the final kitchen cleanup at the base, a young private lingered by the door, nervous, fidgeting. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, "I just wanted to say, my mom was a single parent too. What happened to you at that diner? It happened to us a lot." He stood straighter. "I used to think the Corps was just about combat. Now I get it. We're about standing up for people who deserve to be served." Mira smiled, recognizing in his words the same fire that lived inside her. "That's exactly what your Sergeant Callahan would have said," she replied softly. Driving home that evening, Mira passed the diner, the same one where her world cracked open months earlier. Through the window, she saw families gathered. At the heroes' table sat a young woman with a toddler, her head bowed in quiet thanks. Another widow. But this time, she was being honored, not humiliated. Some meals are never served, but they are never forgotten. For who was turned away, and who stood up beside them? When I first heard Mira Callahan's story, I couldn't stop thinking about my own mother. About nights when our fridge was empty, and all we had was the kindness of someone who saw us, even if the world didn't. We remember those faces. That's why this story matters. Not because it went viral, but because it proves something simple and unshakable. The strongest people in the world aren't always wearing uniforms. Sometimes they're the ones just trying to keep the lights on. Just trying to get their kids through the night. If this story made you think of someone who fought quietly, who never asked for applause but deserved it anyway, share it with them. Let them know they're not alone. "This isn't a place for single mothers and hungry kids," the diner owner had yelled. She'd hugged her children and walked away in silence. No one spoke, no one stopped her. Until a military vehicle pulled up. Until 2 Marines walked in. They didn't come for food. Because sometimes, it's not about a denied dinner. It's about why the entire Marine Corps took it personally.